In this step-by-step landscape watercolour tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create texture using granulation medium, salt and other yummy techniques. So, shall we get started? I'm going to draw my painting with a brown watercolour pencil on cold press 300 grams paper. It's a very simple drawing. I'm starting with the top of the mountain and I'm just going to sort of draw in the bottom of the mountain there very lightly with my watercolour pencil, and then just the wall in the foreground. This was a photograph I took recently in Scotland, and it was in a village called Lennoxtown, and it's a town situated at the foot of the Campsie Fells in East Dunbartonshire in Scotland. The reason why I'm using a watercolour pencil is when you start painting it will kind of disappear, so you won't have any pencil lines, and I've used the brown because it kind of harmonises with the rest of the painting. So I'm just sketching in the building there, the tree, keeping everything really simple. This is going to be an atmospheric, semi-abstract painting, so don't worry about the drawing. I'm using cobalt blue because it's a very textured blue. It granulates when the pigment sort of disperses and you get all this lovely yummy texture. I'm wetting the paper first. I'm using my flat 1-inch brush, a nice puddle of cobalt blue there, and then painting wet into wet, sort of painting lots of blue at the top of the sky, keeping the bottom of the sky lighter as it goes behind the mountains there. And I'm tilting to allow the paint to flow to the right there to create some really lovely flow and atmosphere in the sky. So I'm rinsing my brush there, and I'm just going to sort of lighten and smooth the bottom part of the sky there with a clean, damp brush. You can see the granulation there up close. It creates wonderful textures in your painting. Some paints granulate, some don't. Some are quite smooth. You'll find a lot of the staining colours don't granulate. This is Daniel Smith's Lunar Black. Now this really does granulate. It's got an amazing quality of sort of texture. So I'm mixing that now with a cobalt blue. Now you don't need to run out and buy these colours. It's just to show you what happens sometimes with these different paints. So I'm painting this damp into wet. What that means is the paint's slightly creamier now, but the surface is wet, so it doesn't run as much. And I'm just painting that with my size 10 brush, keeping the darks at the top of the sky. And I'm using a clean damp brush just to pick up that puddle at the bottom of the sky there. I'm using Winsor & Newton's granulation fluid. It's quite a nice way of creating granulation, especially with colours that don't naturally granulate. So I'm using a pipette to apply the granulation fluid. You can use a brush. And Winsor & Newton do say use plenty of it to create a granulation effect. So I'm applying it here, squeezing the pipette there to load the pipette with granulation fluid, and I'm applying it to the damp paint and letting it drizzle down. Now it's not my typical sky here, it's quite abstract. I'm letting it all flow, and I'm really just experimenting just to see what happens and really to show you what happens with granulation fluid. So as you can see there, can't really see much happening at the moment. Sometimes you have to apply a little bit more and some colours work better than others, but I can see a little bit of granulation now. And I'm just tilting as well, allowing the fluid to sort of flow into the rest of the paint. As you can see, I've got another little puddle at the bottom of the sky. So as Winsor & Newton say, I'm applying very generously some more granulation fluid to get the paint to granulate a little bit more. And I can see it is there a little bit to the right especially. So I'm going to paint the Campsie Fells here, and I'm using quinacridone gold and raw sienna. If you don't have quinacridone gold, don't worry. You could just use the raw sienna and maybe add a touch of burnt sienna. I am painting this wet into wet with my size 10 brush. And as you see there, I'm actually touching the sky to allow the sky colour to run down to create some yummy sort of textured effects, but also to allow the granulation fluid as well to come down into the yellow. It's a beautiful colour there. And the light, when I took this photograph on the Campsie Fells, it was just stunning. The light up there was amazing. I am using lots of artistic license in this painting. I'm not exactly copying that photograph. I'm using it as a reference. I'm just collecting the puddle here, allowing the paint to flow. I'm using Tundra Orange by Schmincke. It's a super granulating colour, and Green Apatite Genuine by Daniel Smith. It creates some wonderful textures. Again, you don't have to rush out and buy these paints. It's just to show you the different things that are out there and the kind of things that I use as well, the different paints. So here goes with the Tundra Orange. It's not quite an orange colour. It's a lot more of an earthy orange colour. I'm painting this damp into wet there, so the surface is very wet. I'm just sort of painting this colour. It's quite a nice colour match to the photograph as well. I'm using my size 8 brush. I just want to see what happens. I can't really see a lot of granulation at the moment, and I'm just softening that yellow at the bottom there and just using some water there to blend as well. I'm using the Green Apatite Genuine now and just painting this above that white building to the right, sort of have some little bit of greenery there as well. What I love about Green Apatite Genuine is the sort of texture appears a little bit later. You don't see it straight away. And as you saw there, my tube was empty, and I tend to buy this quite a lot. I just love this colour. So I'm just painting this damp into damp now with the tip of my brush to create some textures on the top of the hills here, and just tilting as well to allow the paint to flow and to blend as well, and just to create maybe some happy accidents. Just softening here with a clean damp brush, just dragging that sort of paint down a little bit to the wall in the foreground where there's lots of yummy moss and textures. And I'm mixing up a little bit of burnt sienna now, and that does granulate quite nicely as well. And I'm just painting this just behind the top of the wall. There's a lot of warmth there as well, and I'm using my size 6 round brush, pushing that into the Green Apatite Genuine. If you look at the top of the mountains where I use the green, you can start to see some texture there from that green paint. So I'm using the green paint now for the moss on the top of the wall in the foreground with my size 6 brush, working wet on dry. And I've also left some white there at the top to create some light and light textures as well. I'm applying a creamier, thicker Green Apatite Genuine now on top of the damp paint to create a darker green just here and there, and then applying a little bit more burnt sienna just underneath there. And as the same as the Green Apatite Genuine, I'm just going to apply slightly thicker, creamier burnt sienna here and there. I'm using Lunar Black now. That's that lovely textured Daniel Smith colour, and painting that damp into damp and just adding a little bit of water there as well to dilute and blend into the green, and also to tilt, as you can see there, to get some lovely yummy textures happening. And just applying a little bit of dark there with my size 4 brush as well, damp into wet. I'm applying a little bit now of the Green Apatite Genuine, slightly creamier here, damp into wet, just behind that white house, and then applying a little bit of that Lunar Black, damp into damp as well. Hopefully that'll create some nice textures later. I'm also adding a few more darks and details, damp into damp in the foreground. I'm using a plastic card now. I've cut the card up, and I'm going to use that to scratch into the damp surface to create thin, dark lines. This is permanent, so you may want to practice it first, but it's lovely because what happens is the paint runs into the scratch to create a dark line, and you can create sort of thin sort of tree trunks and branches there just in the sort of middle distance here, and it's fun to do. So I'm using a little bit of the Lunar Black again with my size 4 brush, and just painting this tree to the left here, just some darks at the bottom, and adding some water. I'm going to tilt that and let it run up into the sort of damp paint there, and I'm teasing it with my brush and turning the painting upside down and see if it can really move that paint a little bit more. I'm using Tundra Violet now, another Schmincke super granulating paint. I'm just applying a little bit here to the foreground area with my size 4 brush, and damp into damp on to the hill here. So as you can see, it's not a bright violet at all. And I'm being quite bold with my colours here, because I'm going to be using some granulation fluid again. So I'm being very liberal with this and creating sort of marks and sort of details on the hill there, and also applying some dark violet at the top as well to sort of really bring that hill away from the light sky. So here goes with the granulation fluid. I am tilting as well just to get the paint moving. I'm using my pipette and I'm just sort of teasing the sort of dark violet away from the top there and letting it all run down, just to see if I can see some exciting granulation effects. I'm being very liberal with it, and I don't mind it running all over the house. I don't mind. This is a sort of semi-abstract. I'm experimenting, and I always find at the beginning of a year it's good to just try new things. You know, sometimes you can be tightened up if you haven't painted for a while. I haven't actually done that much painting over the holiday, so it's quite nice to try something like this to sort of get rid of all the cobwebs, as it were. And as you can see there, I'm using a clean damp brush just to blend some of those marks there that may look a bit awkward. I'm also spattering some water as well. I love painting textures in landscapes. There's so many ways of doing it, and you can really experiment, because the landscape can be so abstract if you look up close especially. So I'm using the plastic card again to scratch in, but also to manoeuvre the paint to create details and dark marks there. I've dipped my card straight into the Lunar Black, which is straight from the tube, and I'm just applying that with the plastic card, damp into damp. If you don't have tubes, you could spray your pans about half an hour beforehand and it should moisten them up, but tubes are better for that technique. And I'm just painting a little bit of that Lunar Black there, just at the bottom, and then again tilting and seeing what happens. And as I can see where I've used the granulation fluid with the violet, it's created, as you can see there, some wonderful granulating textures. See the pigments sort of really kind of broken away, and it just looks stunning. So I'm applying a little bit more of the Lunar Black just to kind of really accentuate some of those marks. It's not quite like the photograph. I want to create some drama here, and that's what I'm doing. And again, I'm applying the granulation fluid, experimenting really. In some ways you wouldn't want to overdo this, but I'm just trying things out, just showing you, and sometimes less is more, and I'm probably doing a little bit more here than usual, but I really quite like doing this, especially with the Tundra Violet and the Lunar Black. I thought it'd be quite nice actually to make the sky a little bit more dramatic, especially with my sort of darker sort of hills here. So I've added some more Lunar Black to the Cobalt blue, damp into damp there. I'm just rinsing my brush now, and I'm just softening the sort of dark edge there and just tilting, and oops, all the paint's just run into the sky, but actually that's great. It's a happy accident. And what I'm doing here is I'm using my spritzer bottle just with clean water, and I'm just spritzing that area so I can just clean that area of the sky up where it ran from the sort of mountains into the sky. So what I'm doing now is I'm using the plastic card again with the Lunar Black and just applying creamy paint straight from the tube and getting back some of that dark that I lost when I spritzed off. So as I said earlier, it is experimental, and you just want to play and try things out. You can learn so much about watercolour, not just granulation, but just what happens. So you can see that's quite dramatic there, especially at the top. And I've actually made the mountain a little bit higher there as well. And I'm letting everything run down. There's some wonderful textures and granulation there. The only thing that's not got any paint on it is the white building, because I haven't wet it. If you wet an area, you're more likely to have the paint sort of spread on it. But if you keep it dry, the paint shouldn't flow onto it. But you could actually mask it out as well if you are worried. So I'm applying a little bit more Lunar Black to the wall in the foreground there with my card. I'm tilting, allowing all the paint to run down there and using my card to paint in some of the branches. And I'm lifting off some light in the sky with my paper towel because I lost a little bit of the light. I'm using some salt here. I'm going to sprinkle it on to the damp paint. I'm going to allow that to dry, naturally. It'll create some lovely, hopefully light, yummy textures. I'm using a sponge from an old scourer. It's a damp sponge. I'm just lifting off a little bit more of the paint here. The paper towel didn't take enough off, and it creates a softer effect. You can use a natural sponge as well, but I wanted that contrast between the dark sky and the top dark of the mountain there with light clouds. I'm using some Indian ink now. You can use acrylic ink. I find this works best with granulation fluid. So I'm applying this just to this corner here as an experiment, just to show you what it does. So I'm using a pipette and I'm just sort of spreading it a little bit with my brush onto the damp surface there. And again, applying the granulation fluid with the pipette, letting it run, seeing what happens, running it up, running it down, over the wall. It doesn't matter, just see what happens, because this can be really sort of semi-abstract. Applying liberally some more granulation fluid, and straight away you can see the texture and the granulation is so much better with the ink than it is with the watercolour. I think the watercolour gets washed away more, the actual pigment, where this sort of stops a little bit more, so you can see the kind of special effects in a way. So it might be worth, if you like this effect, to get some granulation fluid and maybe just a sepia Indian ink or acrylic ink. That's all you need. And look at that, it looks amazing. I'm really pleased with that. So I decided to experiment. So I've washed off the paint at the top of my mountain just to see if it would come off and what would happen. It's left some nice marks there. So I've decided to apply a little bit of the Indian ink, it's sepia, just to see if I can get some yummy granulation there with that, more so than the paint. So you can see there it's all damp, and I'm applying it with my size 6 brush and letting it run down, seeing what happens. And it's quite a nice effect there, lovely dark. And I'm just applying liberally again the granulation fluid and letting it flow. It's actually run over the house a little bit, but I don't mind. I quite like that sort of thing, and it's running up into the sky. So I'm tilting here and there just to see what happens. I probably have overdone this a bit, but it's just to show you sometimes what happens if you do overdo it, and maybe how to rescue it if that happens. But when I was experimenting with stuff like this, I want to find out, I want to learn. So I'm just applying a little bit of the Lunar black here as well, just back in there with my size 4 brush, and even using the base of the brush to draw with and see what happens. There is another granulation fluid that I have, and it's Schmincke granulation fluid. I find it behaves very differently to the Winsor & Newton one. I'm just applying it here, and it's a little bit like rubbing alcohol. It behaves slightly differently, but I have applied it with the dropper, the pipette. I haven't spritzed it. I don't like the effect of spritzing it, so I thought I'd try it the similar way that I did with the Winsor & Newton. As you can see, once you allow your painting to dry naturally, it has these sort of circular effects, and if you use the spritzer on the bottle, it has tiny circles, which gives the effect of granulation, but not quite that same texture. So I'm brushing off the salt with a paper towel. Make sure your painting is dry. And it's created some textures there with the salt, not as much as I'd like, because obviously I was sort of using lots of granulation fluid, so I think I diluted it all. But I just thought with my little star of the show here, my little white house, I thought I'd just start painting it. So I'm using some of the Lunar black here, and I'm just painting a little bit of an outline of the white building there. And I've kind of used a bit of artistic license. I've given it a pitched roof as well, just to kind of tidy it up. I lost a little bit of the shape. So I'm painting some little dark windows there to the right and to the left. And now I'm painting a tree trunk and branches to this tree on the left. Now I don't want to lose too much of my granulation effect here, so I'm not painting many branches, so you can see and you don't lose that lovely texture. So I'm just sort of using my size 4 brush and painting some fine lines in there, and just in the foreground as well, still using my size 4 brush with the Lunar black. A few more little branches just here and there, pretty much wet on dry. I've mixed a little bit of white with Tundra orange there, just to paint a lighter roof to the left, the light's coming from the left. So I'm mixing up some red here with a little bit of the violet. So it's a lovely warm colour, and I'm applying it to the sponge, adding a little bit more red there to make it slightly warmer. And I'm just going to print very gently some of that those red sort of trees there in the foreground area just below the house and behind the wall. And it just creates a bit of warmth, creating depth, bring it forward. And what I'm doing now is I've mixed up some dilute ultramarine with a tiny touch of that black. And I'm just going to paint and glaze a shadow on the right hand side of the house, and that will make it look a bit more 3D. And I'm just tidying up the left side with some white gouache, wet on dry. And I'm going to use the scourer sponge again, but this time the green side to create some texture. So I'm painting the white gouache straight onto the sponge, and I'm just tapping, as you saw there, practiced on the left, just to make sure I don't paint too much, but just painting some light textures here and there on the wall in the foreground. I wasn't sure about those circles up there left by the Schmincke granulation fluid medium. So I'm just applying a little bit of the Lunar black there, wet on dry, just to cover up. You can still see the circles coming through because it is dilute and transparent, but it just pushes it back a bit. It doesn't take my eye away from the star of the show. So I'm just applying a little bit more dark there to the top of the hill there as well, using my size 8 brush. To stop myself from overworking, I'm just using some paper towel to protect the sky while I spatter some of that black here and there with my size 6 round brush just in front of the wall on the actual hillside, and just to create lots of yummy textures. I'm using some raw sienna mixed with some yellow here, and I'm just spattering that here and there, especially in the foreground, to sort of create depth in the painting with this lovely detail, light yellow warm colour. Really load that brush and tap away. And it really has brought the foreground to life, actually, using the sponge, the spattering, and actually painting more detail on the building as well. So I'm just giving a few more little spatters, really loading my brush, and again protecting the sky with my hand as well. I'm going to finish off with a white spatter here, and it's slightly watered down white gouache just here and there to finish off. And here's a close-up. You can see all the wonderful textures and granulation. What fun this has been. I've removed the washi tape to reveal a lovely white border, and it will give you time to assess to see if you need to do any more. But as you can see, I've done plenty. I don't think I need to do any more. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I loved painting this and learning about granulation and textures, etc. I really hope this inspires you to have a go at painting something like this. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. And if you'd like to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, where you'll get updates of my latest tutorials. And if you want to get access to my exclusive weekly tutorials, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about the membership can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Happy texture painting. Bye for now.